Right. Imagine a man who walked through fire shaped by struggle, hardened by injustice, and fueled by a relentless desire for truth. A man whose words shook the foundations of a nation. A man whose transformation was so powerful, so undeniable that it changed the course of history. This is the story of Malcolm X, a man who went from anger to enlightenment, from division to from seeking justice, through conflict to finding peace and truth. But what was it that made him walk away from everything he once believed? What was it that opened his eyes to a reality so profound that it redefined his entire purpose? What did he see? What did he experience that made him embrace Islam not just as a religion, but as the truth that shattered every lie he had ever been told? This is not just history, this is a journey of awakening, a story of courage, and a message that still echoes through time. By the end of this, you'll understand why Malcolm X's choice to accept Islam wasn't just personal, it was revolutionary. Stay with me because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see the world. Malcolm X's story is not just about a man, it's about an entire people, a struggle, a fight for dignity, a journey from darkness to light. He was born into a world where being black in America meant living under constant oppression, a system designed to break spirits before they could even dream of rising. His father, a passionate speaker and activist, fought for the rights of black people, but that fight came at a heavy price. When Malcolm was just 6 years old, his father was killed in what was officially ruled an accident, but many believed it was a targeted attack. That loss was the first deep wound in a life that would be shaped by hardship and injustice. His mother left to raise her children alone, struggled against poverty and the weight of a society that sought to erase her strength. Eventually, the pressure became too much. She was institutionalized in a mental hospital, and Malcolm, along with his siblings, was scattered into different foster homes. From a young age, he learned a brutal lesson. The world was not fair, and no one was coming to save him. Despite the challenges, Malcolm was an intelligent and charismatic young man. He had dreams, ambitions, and a sharp mind. But when he told his school teacher he wanted to be a lawyer, he was laughed at. A black boy, a lawyer, that wasn't meant for him. The teacher said he should think about something more realistic, maybe a laborer or servant. Those words cut deep. If education wasn't a path for him, then what was? With little hope and even fewer opportunities, Malcolm turned to the streets. In the 1940 years, the streets of Boston and Harlem were filled with young black men trying to survive in a world that had already counted them out. He became a hustler, a gambler, a thief, doing whatever it took to get by. Life in the fast lane gave him money, respect, and a sense of control. But it was a dangerous game. He was smart, but even the smartest men get caught. Eventually, in 1946, at the age of 20, he was arrested for robbery and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Prison could have been the end of Malcolm X's story, but instead it became the beginning of his transformation. At first, he was rebellious, refusing to conform, refusing to be broken by the system. But something changed. He met fellow prisoners who introduced him to ideas he had never considered before about black empowerment, about knowledge, and about Islam. One of his brothers wrote him letters telling him about a movement that was rising, one that preached that black people were not inferior, that they were not destined to be slaves forever. Malcolm was skeptical at first. Religion had never been part of his life in a meaningful way, but as he sat in that prison cell, he began reading. He devoured books on philosophy, history, and spirituality. He studied the teachings of Islam, and for the first time, he saw a different version of himself, one that wasn't a criminal, wasn't a hustler, but a man with purpose. Prison didn't just lock Malcolm X up, it woke him up. He realized that the system wasn't just built to oppress black people, it was built to keep them from ever realizing their own strength. The chains weren't just on their hands, they were on their minds. And Malcolm decided he would break those chains, not just for himself, but for his people. When Malcolm X walked out of prison, he wasn't the same man who had entered the streets, had once been his school, but prison had become his university. He had spent years behind bars, reading, learning, and reshaping his mind. He had come into contact with the teachings of the Nation of Blislam, no OA, a movement that spoke directly to the struggles of Black Americans, telling them they were not inferior, not destined for suffering, but chosen strong and worthy of dignity. He had found a cause, a purpose, something bigger than himself. As he stepped back into the world, he quickly rose through the ranks of the Nation of Blislam. He was not just another member, he was a force of nature. He had the fire, the passion, and the ability to articulate what so many had felt but could not express. He spoke with conviction, with power, with an unshakable belief that Black people had been lied to for too long, told they were nothing, when in reality they were kings, warriors, survivors of the system designed to break them. Malcolm X became the face of the Nation of Islam. He toured the country spreading the message that Black people didn't have to accept the role America had forced upon them. He told them to stand tall, to reclaim their identity, to separate from the systems that had oppressed them for centuries. His words were sharp, direct, unapologetic. He didn't soften his message for white America. He didn't beg for acceptance. He spoke truth raw and unfiltered, and people listened. His speeches filled rooms with electrifying energy. His presence commanded attention. He spoke about self-respect, about discipline, about taking control of one's own destiny. He challenged the idea that Black people had to wait for justice to be given to them. He didn't believe in waiting, he believed in action. His words didn't just inspire, they ignited something in people, a sense of urgency, a refusal to stay silent any longer. But as his influence grew, so did the tensions around him. The government watched him closely, fearing the power he held over the minds of the oppressed. The media painted him as dangerous, radical, a threat to the American way of life. And even within the Nation of Islam, not everyone was comfortable with how big he was becoming. He had become more than just a spokesman. He had become a leader in his own right, and that made him a target. It was during this time that Malcolm X started to question everything he had devoted himself to, the nation of EAMT, to its leader Elijah Muhammad, believing it to be the ultimate truth. But then he started to see cracks in the foundation. He discovered things about the organization that didn't align with the ideals he had been preaching. He found out that Elijah Muhammad, the man he had revered, was not living by the principles he claimed to stand for. Betrayal hit him hard. He had dedicated his life to this movement, and now he was forced to confront a painful truth. It was not what he thought. It was the ideals he had fought for, the vision he had painted for millions, felt tainted. He had a choice. It ignored what he had learned and continued being the face of something he no longer fully believed in, or step away and seek the truth no matter the cost. And Malcolm X was never a man to live a lie. He made the decision to leave the Nation of Islam, to walk away from the organization that had shaped him, given him a platform, and made him who he was, but he didn't walk away from his mission. He knew his purpose was greater than any single movement. He was on a journey, and that journey was far from over. He had left behind what he once thought was the truth, but he was about to find something even greater. When Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam, he found himself in uncharted territory for years. His identity had been tied to the movement. It had given him purpose, direction, a platform to speak truth to power. But now he was alone, stripped of the organization that had shaped him, and yet for the first time he was truly free. He was no longer bound by someone else's vision. He was searching for something greater, something real, something that wasn't built on contradictions and deception. And that search led him to something he had never imagined: Mecca. Mecca was more than just a city. It was a journey of transformation. The pilgrimage, the Hajj, was a test of both body and soul. It was not a luxury, not a vacation. It was a challenge experience designed to strip away everything artificial and leave only the raw, unfiltered truth of a person's being. And Malcolm X, a man who had fought against injustice his entire life, walked into that sacred land with questions, doubts, and a heart still scarred by betrayal. What he saw in Mecca changed him forever. He had spent his whole life seeing the world through the lens of race. He had been taught that white people were the enemy, that they were beyond redemption, and yet here he was standing shoulder to shoulder with men of every color, white, black, Arab, Asian, all dressed in the same simple white garments, all bowing to the same God, all equal in a way he had never witnessed before. There were no masters here, no servants, no superior race, just human beings humbled before their Creator. It was a sight that shattered every belief he had once held about race and division. He met people from all walks of life, wealthy, poor, educated, uneducated, and yet they all treated him as a brother, not as a black man, not as an outsider, but as an equal. He saw white men with sincerity in their eyes, not hatred. He saw unity, not division. He had spent years preaching separation, believing that black people could never coexist with white people. But Mecca showed him a different truth. Islam was not about race, not about color. It was about submission to God. Alone about a barn that transcended nationality, ethnicity. This realization was not just a small shift in perspective. It was a complete transformation of his soul. He had been fighting for the dignity of black people, believing that the only way to achieve justice was through separation. But now he saw that true justice, real dignity, came from something deeper, faith. Islam had the answer he had been searching for. It was not about revenge, not about hate, not about creating new divisions. It was about unity, about standing together as one people, as one bound by faith and not by the chains of history. He wrote letters back home sharing what he had seen, trying to put into words the profound shift happening inside him. He spoke about how Islam had shown him a way forward, a way beyond bitterness and anger. He was not abandoning the fight for justice. No, he was seeing it through new eyes. He wanted his people to know that the struggle was not just about breaking free from oppression. It was about finding truth, about finding a path that led not just to power, but to peace. When he left Mecca, he was no longer the Malcolm X that America had known. He was a man reborn, a man who had shed the weight of past grudges, a man who had seen a vision of what the world could be if people embraced the truth. He had ended Mecca with a mission, but he left with something far greater, a new understanding of life, of faith, of purpose. And from that moment on, he would no longer just be Malcolm X. He would be Alhaj Malik el-Shabash, a man who had found the truth he had spent his entire life searching for. When Malcolm X returned from his pilgrimage to Mecca, he was not the same man who had left America. His mind had been opened, his soul had been transformed, and his heart had been filled with a new understanding of justice, unity, and truth. He had walked among men of all colors, worshiped beside those he once believed were his enemies, and had seen firsthand what it meant to submit fully to God. He had found Islam not as an identity tied to race or nationalism, but as a universal faith that embraced all people as equals. And with this newfound clarity, he knew that his mission had to evolve. For years, Malcolm had been one of the most powerful voices in the struggle for black liberation, but his message had always carried an undertone of separation. He had been taught that true empowerment for black people could only come through complete independence from white society. He had believed that racial justice meant turning away from those who had historically oppressed his people, but now he saw something different. He realized that justice was not about division, but about truth, and the truth he had witnessed in Mecca told him that real power did not come from anger. It came from faith, from unity, from recognizing that the struggle was not black against white, but right against wrong. This shift in his perspective was dangerous. It threatened the very foundation of the ideology he had once preached. He knew that the Nation of Islam, which had built its movement on the idea of racial separation, would not accept his transformation. He had already seen the cracks forming before he left. He had begun questioning their leadership, their contradictions, the way power was used to control rather than uplift. But now after Mecca, there was no turning back. He had seen something greater, something purer. He had to speak. So he returned to America, and he spoke with a voice that was more powerful than ever before. He no longer preached hate. He preached truth. He no longer called for division. He called for justice. He no longer believed in enemies based on race. He believed in standing with all those who fought for righteousness, no matter their color. And that message made him more dangerous than ever people listened. They saw the change in him. His words carried a new weight, a new wisdom, a new urgency. He was not just speaking to Black America anymore. He was speaking to the world. He was reaching beyond the lines that had been drawn, beyond the walls that had been built. He spoke to Muslims, to Christians, to anyone who had the courage to hear the truth. He called out injustice wherever he saw it. He refused to stay silent about corruption, about hypocrisy, about those who used religion as a tool for power rather than as a path to righteousness, and that made him a target. The moment Malcolm X stopped being a man of division and became a man of unity, his days were numbered. He had been tolerated when he was just another radical voice, just another figure fueling racial anger. But now he was something much more powerful. He was a man who could bridge gaps, who could unite people, who could inspire real change. And for those in power, those who thrived on division, that was the greatest threat of all. He knew it was coming. He saw the warnings. He heard the threats. He felt the betrayal creeping closer with every step he took. But he did not stop. He could not stop. He had found the truth. And once you see the truth, you cannot turn away. He had spent his life fighting for his people, and now he was fighting for something even bigger. He was fighting for justice, for righteousness, for a world where faith and dignity were not determined by the color of a person's skin, but by the character of their soul. And so he walked forward knowing that the path he had chosen was not one that would lead to comfort or safety. He walked forward because the truth demanded it, because his faith gave him the strength to do so, because he had seen a vision of something greater than himself. And even as the shadows closed in around him, he did not falter, because he knew that his words, his message, his fight would live on long after he was gone. Malcolm X had always been a man in search of truth, but the truth he found in Islam was unlike anything he had ever known. It was not just a religion to him. It was a complete transformation, a rebirth of his mind and soul. Before ISL, his life had been defined by struggle, by anger, by the constant battle against the system that had sought to destroy him and his people. But when he embraced Islam in its purest form, he found something deeper, something more powerful than rage or revenge. He found peace. He found discipline. He found a connection to something greater than himself. His entire journey had been leading to this moment. From his early days in Harlem, where he had been surrounded by crime and survived IAL, to his time in prison, where he first encountered the teachings of the Nation of Kalam, to his years as one of the most influential voices in the fight for Black empowerment, every step had been a lesson, but it wasn't until he made his pilgrimage to Mecca that the true lesson was revealed. He saw Muslims of every race, of every background, praying together as equals, living as brothers. It shattered the narrative he had once believed. He had been told that white people were inherently evil, that the struggle was one of race against race. But in Mecca, he saw white Muslims, Black Muslims, Arabs, Asians, all standing side by side, united in faith. This revelation was both beautiful and painful beautiful because it showed him the true essence of Islam. Painful because it meant he had to rethink everything he had built his movement on. He had been a powerful voice for black nationalism, for separation, for the idea that black people could never coexist with whites in justice or peace. But now he saw that the real enemy was not a race, it was ignorance, corruption, injustice. Itself, the struggle was not about skin color, it was about truth versus falsehood, right versus wrong. This realization gave him a new sense of purpose. He no longer sought to fight only for his people. He sought to fight for all people who were oppressed, who were denied justice. Islam had taught him that righteousness had no color, that faith was the true measure of a man. With that new understanding, he began to reshape his message. He spoke not of hate, but of unity, not of division, but of justice. And in doing so, he became an even greater threat to those who thrived on division. The nation of Zarambada, which had once been his home, now saw him as a traitor. He was no longer willing to follow their rigid structure, their politics, their leadership. He had outgrown their ideology, seen past their limits. He had found Islam in its true form, not as a movement, but as a way of life, a guide to truth. The more he embraced it, the more isolated he became from those who had once stood beside him. But he did not waver. His faith gave him strength. His belief in justice gave him courage. His acceptance of Islam did not make his life easier, it made it harder. He had more enemies than ever. He knew that his days were numbered, but he also knew that he had found something worth standing for, something worth dying for. Islam had given him clarity, a vision beyond the struggle of the moment. It had given him peace, even as he walked into the storm and even as the forces against him closed in, he stood firm. Because he understood that truth was eternal, that faith was unbreakable, and that his mission was bigger than himself. Malcolm X's transformation through Islam was not just a personal journey. It was a movement that shook the foundations of America. His acceptance of true Islam was not merely about adopting a new set of beliefs, but about challenging the very system that had defined his existence. He had spent years fighting against the oppression of black people, exposing the deep wounds of racism in America. But when he embraced Islam in its purest form, he gained a new perspective, one that made him even more dangerous to those who wanted to silence him before Islam. Malcolm was a warrior fueled by rage. His speeches were filled with fire. His words cut through the hypocrisy of a nation that preached equality but practiced oppression. He was fearless, unrelenting, a force that demanded attention, but his fight had always been focused on race, on the idea that black people must rise and separate themselves from white oppression. He had been shaped by pain, by betrayal, by a lifetime of being told he was less than. In that anger, he found purpose. But Islam did something remarkable. It did not take away his fire, it refined it. It gave him wisdom. It gave him direction. When Malcolm made the pilgrimage to Mecca, he saw a world he never knew existed. He stood shoulder to shoulder with people of all colors, of all backgrounds, united in worship. It was a moment that shattered the walls he had built in his mind. He had spent years believing that white people were the enemy, that there was no hope for peace between the races. But in Mecca, he saw white Muslims praying alongside black Muslims. He saw Arabs, Asians, Africans, all calling on the same God, all standing as equals. It was a truth he could not ignore. Returning to America, Malcolm was no longer just a black nationalist. He had become a global revolutionary. He saw oppression not as a battle between races, but as a battle between justice and justice. He no longer preached separation. He preached unity. He no longer called for war. He called for truth. But this shift made him an even greater target. The forces that once supported him now saw him as a traitor. The Nation of Islam, which had once been his home, turned against him. The government, already watching his every move, intensified their surveillance. He had become too powerful, too enlightened, too uncontrollable. But Malcolm did not back down. He knew that embracing Islam fully meant embracing its principles of justice, of peace, of fearlessness in the face of oppression. He had always been a mocked man, but now he understood the depth of the threat he posed. He was not just a black leader anymore. He was a leader for all oppressed people. His words carried a weight that could unite people beyond race, beyond borders. That kind of power terrified those who relied on division to maintain control, even with the constant threats against his life. Malcolm refused to be silent. He continued to speak, to educate, to inspire. He knew that his time was limited, that every day he walked a thin line between life and death, but he also knew that he had found something worth dying for. Islam had given him peace, even as the world around him conspired against him. It had given him clarity, even as others sought to confuse and corrupt the truth. It had given him a mission that was greater than himself. When Malcolm X was assassinated, they thought they had silenced him, but they were wrong. His voice only grew louder. His legacy did not die with him. It lived on in the millions who were inspired by his journey. His acceptance of Islam was not just a personal awakening, it was a revolution. It was proof that truth, once found, cannot be ignored. It was the story of a man who was willing to stand alone, to fight against all odds, because he had discovered a truth that was bigger than himself. Malcolm X's journey was not just about a man changing his faith. It was about a man discovering the truth that set him free. He was once driven by anger, by the scars of oppression, by the belief that justice could only come through division. But when he found Islam in its purest form, he saw a higher purpose, a greater unity, a deeper truth that no enemy could take away from him. His transformation was not a weakness, it was his ultimate strength. It was the moment he became unstoppable. They feared his voice, they feared his message, and they feared the power of the truth he carried. But no bullet, no betrayal, no attempt to silence him could erase what he had ignited. Malcolm X left behind more than just speeches and lessons. He left behind a movement that still shakes the world today. His story is proof that no matter how broken a person may be, truth has the power to rebuild them into something greater. To those who seek truth, to those who stand for justice, and to those who refuse to be silenced, his story is your story. His courage is your call to action. His legacy is a reminder that one voice, when backed by truth, can change history. Stay strong, stay fearless. Keep searching for the truth, and when you find it, stand by it. Good luck on your journey. Thank you for listening.